Welcome to the Customer Experience Administration's first training hosted by me, Dan Farmer. This training focuses on the concept and practice of prototyping, an important part of the human-centered design process. This training is intended for all employees, but especially for those that are in the process of creating something new or making a change that will impact their customers. Building and testing prototypes help us catch usability and functionality issues early, which significantly reduces costly rework and prevents inefficient workarounds down the line. Beyond the financial benefits, prototyping can foster greater alignment among stakeholders, users, and designers, encourage creativity and problem solving, and help build empathy by enabling us to see things from the user's perspective. In this training, we'll focus on what prototyping is, why it's important, and get a chance to learn how to do it well. So, let's jump in. Before we get into the content of this training, take a moment to download the course materials. You can find those on the same page that you found this video, just to the right. There are two documents that you'll need for completing this training: a prototype planning worksheet and the file labeled test card. Please download copies of these to complete during the session. In addition to these worksheets, there is a resource sheet that has links to all the tools and techniques that we'll be discussing. Lastly, just below you'll see a link to a survey that you can take after this training. We'd love your feedback, so don't forget to take the survey. I mentioned a moment ago that prototyping is part of the human-centered design process, so let's take a step back and look at what that process is. The human-centered design process, similar to Lean, is an iterative and structured way of finding out how to best serve your customers. While this diagram shows the process starting with research and discovery, it's important to note that we can choose any of these stages depending on our needs, and we may move back and forth between one stage and another before we get to the refine and implement stage. In this training, we'll focus on the conceptualize and prototype stage of this process. Now that we've talked about the human-centered design process, let's get specific about what we mean when we talk about prototypes and the activity of prototyping. Prototypes are the thing that we're experimenting with to try and find what works best for our customers. While it's more common to think of using prototyping when creating a product, such as a digital or physical product, this practice works for thinking through service delivery, program, and/or policy design. Prototypes can come to life in a variety of ways, including a wireframe, 3D models, videos, sketches, or even a role play. An important part of this practice is embracing failure as part of the learning process. Each new iteration will likely fail in a way that will uncover important insights into what your customers need. As the great inventor Thomas Edison said, "I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work." In fact, this very training is an early prototype of what we hope will eventually be an e-learning module that employees across the agency can take to hone their skills in this practice. So, as you go through this training, we would very much appreciate your open and honest feedback. We'll follow up more on this towards the end, but please take notes throughout about what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you think was missing. As you think about creating or changing your service, program, product, or policy, incorporating the needs of customers early on can help avoid the costly outcome of designing something that is at odds with their needs. I love this visual so much because it illustrates what I see as the most compelling reason to prototype. It goes without saying that the practice of prototyping takes time and effort. Building something and then showing it to potential customers can also feel risky and open you up to criticisms about your approach that may make you have to go back to the drawing board with a solution that you've become very invested in. In this graphic, the yellow line shows a pathway where human-centered design is a part of the development process, and the blue line shows the pathway without human-centered design. While early integration of human-centered design has higher initial costs, these costs pay off in the long run as the product requires less workarounds to meet customer needs. Conversely, while skipping human-centered design reduces startup costs and speeds initial launch, it often results in costly rework and higher ongoing maintenance costs that involve inefficient workarounds to meet customers' needs. The old proverb, "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure," seems very appropriate in this context. In addition to making financial sense, prototyping has a number of other benefits. Alignment. It makes ideas tangible, which means that stakeholders, users, and designers can align on the vision and sort out any disagreements early in the process. Creativity. As you work through multiple prototyping testing cycles, you may uncover surprisingly elegant solutions to complex problems that you never would have considered otherwise. Empathy. Prototyping helps build empathy by letting designers see things from the user's perspective. Now that we've learned the what and the why, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do some thinking about your prototype. Using the activity sheet you downloaded at the start of the course, please think about your product and fill in the sections marked 1 through 4. Pause the video now. Now that you've given your own prototype some thought, let's consider how much effort is appropriate given the stage that your project or product is at. One of the things that I love about prototyping is that it is a practice that can be used regardless of how far along in development you are with your product. If you're early on in development, start with low fidelity prototypes for early exploration and validation of basic concepts. If you're midway through development, medium fidelity prototypes are useful in refining ideas, testing user flows and interactions, and getting more detailed feedback. Reserve high-fidelity prototypes for advanced usability testing, stakeholder presentations, and design handoff to development. Both your prototype and what you're trying to learn should iterate and refine over time. The more prototype cycles you go through, the closer you'll get to your high-fidelity version, where you're trying to test to see if what you've created is achieving the outcomes that you desire. Your likelihood of successfully creating a product, service, or program that does achieve the outcomes you want increases dramatically with each successive prototype and test cycle. As you think about designing your service, here are a few ways you can integrate prototyping into your practice. Storyboarding is a great way of visualizing your customer's service journey. With this technique, you create a comic book style rendition of a new service journey and review it with customers or the internal team to test out potential changes to your service. Improv prototyping is a fun way of getting participants to access new ways of thinking about a problem, and it works across functional and disciplinary barriers. It involves acting out solutions to chronic or daunting problems. Mapping your customer's experience, either through a service blueprint or empathy map, is a great way of understanding the how of service delivery and the why behind user behavior. Check out the resources sheet in the course materials to learn more about how to use these methods. Here are a couple images of what this can look like in practice. To the left, we see a group of people making a cardboard model of the service environment. This is a cheap and easy way to model and move things around to see what will work best for customers. On the right, we see a sketch of what a service journey could look like. Notice the stick figures. You don't have to be an artist to draw out a service journey. This exercise can help you stitch together different moments of the journey in a way that allows you to see the whole picture. Here are some examples of service design prototyping at the HCA. In 2022, the HCA partnered with an organization called Sevilla to transform the enrollment process to improve the experience for both frontline staff and residents. Over 200 hours of interviews were conducted to gather feedback on prototypes of the paper application process. To refine prototypes from these interviews were then used in a pilot to further test the improvements. The pilot showed that residents completed the application 48% faster with minimal losses in completeness and accuracy. Feedback from both residents and frontline staff about the new forms was overwhelmingly positive. As you think about designing a product, here are a few ways you can integrate prototyping into your practice. Wireframes are great for digital products such as websites or apps. They're basically a static, low-fidelity version of the product where you can rapidly test color schemes, font choice, and core usability functions. 3D models take wireframes to the next level and involve a physical mock-up of a product that can be tested. Co-designing is a good practice for creating directly with your users or customers. It can help you understand your users while at the same time promote buy-in and stakeholder alignment. Check out the resources sheet in the course materials to learn more about how to use these methods. Another example of prototyping is when the HCA received feedback from the Apple Health recipients that post-eligibility review, or PER, request for information letter was confusing and difficult to understand. This caused increased phone calls and worried clients. HCA took the information letter to the Consumer Notices Work Group. This work group is comprised of individuals who represent advocacy groups, managed care organizations, in-person assisters, Washington State Health Benefit Exchange staff, HCA staff, and services users. The work group collaborated to completely revamp the request letter and developed a concise, easy-to-read notice that utilizes a table format and plain talk. This greatly improved the return rate for MCS receiving requested information and resulted in less phone calls about this topic. Next, we're going to look at how prototyping can be used in policy design. I really like this visual on the slide because it shows how inserting the practice of iterative prototyping early in the policy formation stage can help open up new ideas before decisions get made and policy is implemented. It also shows how prototyping can lead to learnings that cause policymakers to step back to the understand stage and question assumptions they might not have otherwise questioned. As you think about designing a policy, here are a few ways you can integrate prototyping into your practice. Community engagement is a broad term and one that probably most people think of when getting feedback on policy proposals. Within this practice, however, there are some great human-centered design tools that we can use, such as role-playing and open space. In role-playing, participants take on different roles to simulate the impacts of a proposed policy. As with improv prototyping, this type of activity can help unlock new ways of understanding and thinking about policy impacts. The open space technique is a practice that empowers the community members to help create the agenda and have open discussion about potential policy proposals. Check out the resources sheet in the course materials to learn more about how to use these methods. In this last section, we want to give you some brief advice on how to take what you've built and use it to gather feedback from your customers. The testing and iteration stage of human-centered design could be, and likely will in the future, its own standalone training, but this will give you enough to get started. Whatever method you use to test your ideas, you must be able to capture your learnings in a structured way so that you use what you've learned to iterate on the next design of your service, product, or policy. Think about how to solicit feedback. We've covered some of the tips and tricks in the previous slide, but I can't stress enough how important it is to be thoughtful before you start engaging with users about the questions you'll ask and how you'll capture what you learn. Test your prototypes on actual customers. Be thoughtful about who you're getting feedback from. If you pick just who is easily available, you risk getting feedback that is systematically skewed and can further entrench inequities into your design. Make sure to look at the Equity Toolkit, which is included in the course resources, as you think about who you'll include in your testing. Ask the right questions. Again, I cannot stress the importance of being thoughtful about this before you engage with users or customers. Make sure to be neutral when you present your ideas. Being neutral allows users to offer up sometimes surprising insights into your prototype. Adapt while you test. Don't let your early preparation deter you from making changes as you gather feedback. Sometimes the process of learning from users can take us into unexpected territory. Now that we've spent a little time learning about the different methods of prototyping, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do some thinking about how you'll test your prototype. Using the activity sheet you downloaded at the start of the course, please think about your product and fill in the sections marked 1 through 5. Go ahead and pause the video now. Here are a couple of my favorite ways of organizing the feedback that we receive about prototypes. The top left feedback grid provides a good structure for sorting what you learn into things that are working well, what's not working well, outstanding questions, and ideas for further exploration. Similarly, the I like, I wish, what if structure on the right is a great way of capturing positive feedback about what users like, what they wish the prototype could do, as well as exploring other possibilities. Check out the resources sheet in the course materials for more advice on how to gather insights about your prototype. This concludes our training. I want to thank you so much for taking an interest in this work. As a reminder, this training is itself a prototype, so please take a moment to complete the survey linked on the course website page so that we can continue our own journey of iteration and improvement. If you have any questions or need support or advice on including human-centered design in your work, please reach out to me, Dan Farmer.